7 empires, same weapon, not armies, not plague, not revolution. Something quieter, something inside the coins themselves. A pattern so consistent it looks engineered. And we are inside it right now. I spent years studying financial collapses. I thought each one was unique. A different continent, a different century, a different set of mistakes. I was wrong. When I lined them up side by side, the same sequence appeared every single time. Not similar, identical. The weapon that killed these empires was never a sword. It was their own money, turned against them from the inside out. Let me start with what we think we know. Empires fall because of wars, corruption, weak leadership, overexpansion. Those are the stories we tell in classrooms. But when I examined the actual financial records, a different story emerged. Every empire that collapsed experienced a specific currency death pattern before the political collapse became visible. The money died first. Then the empire followed. When was the last time you checked what a dollar from your childhood actually buys today? Rome is where the pattern first becomes undeniable. In 33 AD, the empire experienced a credit crisis so severe that Emperor Tiberius had to inject 100 million sesterces into the banking system to prevent total collapse. That was a bailout. 2,000 years ago. The mechanism was already there. Debt expanded beyond what the economy could service. And the only answer was to create more money. But Rome did not stop there. Over the next 2 centuries, the silver content of the Roman denarius fell by over 90%. They did not announce this. They did not hold a press conference. They simply made the coins lighter, mixed in cheaper metals, and kept stamping the same face on the front. The promise looked identical. The value inside was being hollowed out, slowly, deliberately, continuously. I used to think debasement was a sign of desperation, a last resort by failing emperors. Now I see it differently. Debasement was stage 1 of a kill sequence, and it always looked like a reasonable policy decision at the time. Fund the army, stabilize the border, feed the capital. Every justification sounded responsible. Every coin that came out of the mint was a little lighter than the one before. If every empire in history was destroyed by the same financial sequence, what makes you certain this one is different? Then I looked at Spain. The Spanish Empire had something no other civilization had ever possessed, an almost unlimited supply of silver pouring in from the Americas, entire fleets crossing the Atlantic loaded with precious metal, and it destroyed them. Prices across Spain rose by approximately 400% during the 1500s. They called it the price revolution. The more silver that flooded in, the less each coin was worth. Spain did not run out of money. Spain drowned in it. That was when the pattern locked into place for me. Rome debased from within. Spain was flooded from without. Different empires, different centuries, different metals. Same result. The currency lost its ability to store value. And once that happened, everything built on top of it began to crack. Trade contracts, military wages, tax systems, land prices, all of it tied to a unit of measurement that was quietly dissolving. I started counting. Rome, Spain, the Byzantines, the Ming Dynasty, the Ottoman Empire, Weimar Germany, the British Empire. 7 collapses across roughly 2,500 years, and in every single case, I found the same 3-stage pattern running underneath the surface. First, the currency is debased. The metal is diluted or the money supply is expanded beyond what the economy produces. Second, the weakened currency is flooded into circulation until it becomes impossible to ignore the loss of value. Third, holders of the currency begin to flee. They exchange it for anything real: land, commodities, foreign assets, anything that is not the dying money. 3 stages, 7 empires, no exceptions. That is not coincidence. That is architecture. Do you know who profits when a currency dies? I want to be clear about something. I am not talking about natural decline. Empires age, systems decay. That is expected. What I am talking about is something more specific, a financial kill sequence that operates inside the currency itself, one that follows such a precise order of operations that it can be identified while it is still running, not after the collapse. During it, the Romans could not see it because no one had mapped it yet. The Spanish could not see it because they believed silver made them invincible. But we have something none of them had. We have all 7 cases laid out in front of us, and when I look at them together, what I see is not a history lesson. It is a blueprint, one that is running right now, in real time, with our money. The question was never whether empires fall. They always do. The question is whether the same weapon kills them every time. And after 7 identical autopsies, I no longer have any doubt about the answer. The question I kept asking myself was simple. How does a currency actually die? Not in theory, not in an economics textbook, in practice, on the ground, in the hands of real people who wake up one morning and realize their life savings by half of what they bought the year before. I needed to understand the mechanics, because once I did, I could not stop seeing them everywhere. I call it the 3-stage kill sequence, not because it sounds dramatic, because it is the most accurate description of what the data shows. Every currency death I examined followed 3 stages in the same order. No empire skipped a stage. No empire reversed the sequence once it started. The machine runs in one direction, and it runs until there is nothing left. Stage 1 is debasement. This is where the currency's foundation is compromised. In metallic systems, this meant reducing the precious metal content in coins. In paper systems, it means expanding the money supply far beyond what the underlying economy produces. The key feature of Stage 1 is that it is invisible to most people. The coins still look the same. The bills still feel the same. The numbers in your account do not change. But the purchasing power behind each unit is quietly shrinking. Has anyone explained to you why your groceries cost more every year while official inflation reports say the economy is stable? Henry VIII of England understood Stage 1 perfectly. In 1543, he launched what historians call the Great Debasement. He reduced the silver content of English coinage by approximately 75%. He needed money to fund wars with France and Scotland. He could not raise taxes without provoking rebellion. So he did something quieter. He changed what was inside the coins. The face on the front stayed the same. The weight felt close enough. But the silver was being replaced with copper. Within years, the coins began turning reddish as the thin silver plating wore off. They called him Old Copper Nose. People laughed, but the economy was already bleeding. That is the hallmark of Stage 1. It always begins with a legitimate crisis, a war, a famine, a border emergency, something urgent enough to justify the debasement. And the justification always sounds reasonable in the moment. But once the process starts, it never stops, because the crisis is never truly resolved. It is temporarily funded, and the next crisis requires even more debasement to address. This is the trap. The solution to the first emergency creates the conditions for the second one. Stage 2 is the flood. This is where the debased currency enters circulation at scale. In Rome, it was millions of diluted denarii pouring out of imperial mints. In Ming Dynasty China, it was paper notes, called da Mingbao Chao, issued starting in 1375. The government printed them to fund military campaigns and public works. Within decades, they printed so many that the notes became nearly worthless. People refused to accept them. Trade reverted to silver and barter. If you were holding a currency losing value every month, at what point would you trade it for something real? Stage 2 is where the kill sequence becomes an extraction engine. Here is how it works mechanically. When a currency is debased, an arbitrage window opens. Those who recognize the debasement early can borrow in the weakening currency and purchase real assets, land, commodities, productive businesses, foreign holdings. They exchange something that is losing value for something that holds value. Then they wait. As the currency continues to fall, their debts shrink in real terms while their assets appreciate. They get richer precisely because the currency is dying. This is not theft in any legal sense. It is structural arbitrage against a dying unit of account, and it happens in every single case. The Byzantine Empire provides the starkest example of stages 1 and 2 running together. The gold solidus was the most trusted coin in the Western world for over 700 years. It maintained its gold purity from the 4th century through the 10th. Merchants across Europe, North Africa, and Asia accepted it without question. Then, in the 11th century, Byzantine emperors began reducing the gold content. Within 100 years, the coin that had anchored international trade for 7 centuries became unreliable. Trade routes shifted. Merchant networks found alternatives. The empire that had built its power on the trustworthiness of its money lost that trust, and it never recovered. That is what most people miss about Stage 2. It is not just about prices going up. It is about trust going down. A currency is not a physical object. It is a shared agreement, a collective belief that this token will be accepted tomorrow at roughly the same value as today. Stage 2 does not just inflate prices. It fractures the agreement itself. And once fractured, no policy can restore it. You cannot legislate trust back into existence. In every empire that fell, ordinary people were the last to understand what was happening to their money. Where do you think you sit in that timeline? Stage 3 is the flight. This is the terminal phase. It begins when enough holders of the currency simultaneously conclude that it will not recover. They do not coordinate. They do not conspire. They simply act on the same information at roughly the same time. And when they do, the currency enters a death spiral. Selling pressure drives the value down further, which triggers more selling, which drives it down again. This is the phase where hyperinflation becomes visible, where prices change weekly, then daily, then hourly. Weimar Germany is the textbook case of Stage 3. The paper mark started 1914 at approximately 4.2 per dollar. By November 1923, it took 4.2 trillion marks to buy $1. People burned banknotes for heat because the paper was worth more as fuel than as money. Workers were paid twice a day so they could spend their wages before prices rose again by evening. That was not economic policy failing. That was Stage 3 of the kill sequence completing its run. But here is what disturbs me most about the three-stage sequence. It does not require an external enemy. Every stage can be initiated, accelerated, and completed entirely from within. The debasement is done by the government. The flood is enabled by the financial system. The flight is executed by the population. The empire kills its own currency with its own hands, using its own institutions. The enemy was never outside the gates. The enemy was in the mint, in the treasury, in the central bank, printing press running, ledger books open, every entry perfectly legal. The mechanism is clear. The sequence is documented. The question that remains is the one that kept me awake. If every empire destroys its own currency, who benefits? Someone always does. And in every case I examined, the beneficiaries were identifiable. They were inside the system. They saw the sequence before the public did, and they positioned themselves accordingly. That is where we go next. Into the room where the insiders sit. Into the room where the insiders sit. That is where the pattern becomes personal. Because the three-stage kill sequence does not run itself. It requires participants, not conspirators in a dark room. Something worse. Rational actors following incentives that guarantee destruction. People who see the sequence clearly and profit from every stage of it. I used to believe currency collapses were chaotic, unpredictable, events that blindsided everyone equally. That belief did not survive the evidence. When I examined the financial records of every empire in terminal decline, the same phenomenon appeared. A positioned class of financial elites began converting currency holdings into real assets years before the final collapse became obvious. Not months, years. They were not predicting the future. They were reading the sequence, and they moved accordingly. Rome made this visible first. By the late 3rd century, the denarius had lost virtually all its silver content. Prices were spiraling. Trade was fragmenting. But the Roman patrician class was not suffering equally. Historical records indicate that wealthy Romans had been converting their holdings into agricultural land, provincial estates, and physical commodities long before the currency reached its terminal phase. They did not wait for stage 3. They moved during stage 2. While the coins were still circulating, while ordinary Romans still trusted them. If the wealthiest people in every empire moved out of the currency before it collapsed, what are the wealthiest people doing with their money right now? The pattern repeated in every case I studied, and it was never hidden. It was simply ignored. In Weimar, Germany, an industrialist named Hugo Stinnes built one of the largest corporate empires in Europe during the hyperinflation. His method was almost elegant in its brutality. He borrowed enormous sums in depreciating marks. He used those marks to purchase real assets, factories, mines, shipping lines, newspapers. As the mark collapsed, his debts evaporated in real terms, but his assets remained. By 1923, he controlled over 1,000 enterprises. The currency was dying, and he was feeding on its corpse. Stinnes was not a criminal. He broke no laws. Every transaction was conducted openly. That is what makes the pattern so difficult to confront. The extraction is not illegal. It is structural. The kill sequence creates an arbitrage opportunity so large that anyone with access to credit and information will exploit it. Not because they are evil, because the incentive is overwhelming. The system rewards those who abandon the currency early and punishes those who hold it until the end. Loyalty to the money is financially irrational, and the insiders know it first. The Fugger banking family of Augsburg operated this same playbook across the 16th century. They financed Habsburg wars. They lent to monarchs across Europe. And they understood currency dynamics better than any government they served. When Spanish silver flooded European markets and destabilized currencies, the Fuggers were already positioned. They held diversified assets across multiple kingdoms. They charged interest rates that accounted for debasement risk. They profited from the instability they helped finance. The wars weakened currencies. The weakened currencies created lending opportunities. The lending funded more wars. A perfect loop. And the Fuggers sat at the center of it. Do you believe the institutions managing your retirement account have your timeline in mind or theirs? Here is what connects every case. The inside actors do not cause the kill sequence. They do not need to. The sequence begins on its own, through war spending, through political promises that require monetary expansion, through structural deficits that compound over decades. The insiders simply recognize the sequence earlier than everyone else, and they act on that recognition. Their advantage is not secret information. It is structural literacy. They understand how money systems work at a level the general population is never taught. The British Empire offers the most instructive modern example. The pound sterling was the world's dominant reserve currency for over a century. It anchored global trade. It financed colonial expansion. It was considered as permanent as the empire itself. Then 2 world wars drained British gold reserves. Debt levels exploded. The government borrowed beyond any realistic capacity to repay. Between 1914 and 1956, the pound lost its reserve status in slow motion. Institutional holders began diversifying out of sterling years before the formal transitions. The Bank of England saw the data. The merchant banks saw the data. They adjusted their positions. Ordinary British citizens held pounds. They trusted the system. They were the last to move. And they bore the heaviest losses. That is the consistent feature across all 7 empires. The general population is always last. Not because they are foolish, because they are structurally excluded from the information that matters. They are told the currency is stable. They are told inflation is temporary. They are told the institutions are strong. And every single one of those statements is technically true, right up until the moment it is not. The transition from true to false happens faster than any individual can react, unless they already know the sequence. When the Roman elite bought land and the Weimar industrialists bought factories, they were not predicting the future. They were reading the sequence. Can you read it? I want to be honest about something. I spent years inside this system trusting the same institutions I am describing. I held dollar-denominated assets and believed the fundamentals were sound. I looked at the same headlines everyone else looked at, and I drew the same comfortable conclusions. It was only when I began mapping the historical kill sequences against current data that my confidence collapsed. Not gradually, all at once, like stepping on what you think is solid ground and finding nothing underneath. The Ottoman Empire followed the same trajectory across the 18th and 19th centuries. Successive sultans debased the AKC and then the Kurush to fund military campaigns and administrative costs. The Galata bankers, many of them foreign financiers operating within Ottoman borders, positioned themselves in foreign currencies and trade commodities. As the Ottoman monetary system deteriorated, these bankers expanded their influence. They became creditors to the state. The empire borrowed from the very people profiting from its currency's decline. Each loan further weakened the currency. Each weakening created demand for more loans. The loop ran until the empire could no longer service its debts, and the bankers emerged wealthier than before. 7 empires, 7 positioned classes, 7 populations left, holding the dying currency. The mechanism never changes. The faces change. The flags change. The century changes. But the architecture is identical. A small group recognizes the kill sequence. They convert out of the currency. They acquire real assets. They wait. And when the currency finally dies, they own everything that matters: the land, the resources, the productive capacity, while everyone else holds paper that no longer buys anything at all. The question I could not escape was the most uncomfortable one. If this pattern is so clear, so documented, so historically consistent, why does no institution stop it? The answer took me a long time to accept. No institution stops it, because every institution's survival depends on the sequence continuing. Central banks must expand the money supply to prevent short-term crises. Governments must borrow to fund operations. Financial institutions must lend to generate returns. Every actor in the system has a mandate that requires the sequence to run. Stopping it would mean immediate institutional failure, so they let it run, and they position themselves for what comes after. That is the trap inside the trap. The system cannot rescue itself, because rescue requires every institution to act against its own short-term survival. And no institution in recorded history has ever done that voluntarily. Not Rome, not Spain, not Britain, not one. Which brings us to the only question that remains, the one I have been circling since the beginning. What happens when you map this sequence onto the present, onto the currency in your wallet right now, onto the system holding your retirement? I already mapped it, and I need to show you what I found. I already mapped it, and what I found follows the same sequence so precisely that I had to check my own work 3 times. Not because the data was unclear, because I did not want it to be true. I wanted the United States dollar to be the exception, the one currency in history that broke the pattern. It is not. The 3-stage kill sequence is already running, and we are not in the early stages. Stage 1. Debasement. The United States dollar has lost over 96% of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve was established in 1913. A dollar from that year buys less than 4 cents worth of goods today. That is not a temporary fluctuation. That is a century-long debasement curve, and it accelerated. The money supply expansion after 2008 was unlike anything in American history. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet went from approximately $900 billion in 2008 to nearly $9 trillion by 2022. That is a 10-fold increase in 14 years. We did not earn that money. We did not produce it. We created it, digitally, instantly, and pushed it into the system. If you mapped your retirement savings against the purchasing power of the dollar over the next 20 years using historical debasement rates, would you still feel secure? I want to be precise about something. The gold standard was the structural anchor that limited Stage 1. It physically constrained how much currency could be created. On August 15, 1971, President Nixon severed the dollar's convertibility to gold. He called it temporary. That was over 50 years ago. The constraint was removed. And from that moment forward, there was no mechanical limit on dollar creation. The only limit was institutional willingness. And institutions under political pressure have never chosen restraint. Not once. Not in any empire. Not in any century. That was the moment Stage 1 went from slow to structural. Before 1971, the dollar was debased gradually. After 1971, debasement became the operating system. Deficits could be funded directly through money creation. Debt could expand without any physical anchor pulling it back. The United States national debt has now surpassed $36 trillion. Annual interest payments alone exceeded $1 trillion in 2024. We are borrowing money to pay the interest on money we already borrowed. That is not fiscal policy. That is the debasement loop running exactly as it ran in Rome, in Spain, in every empire I studied. Stage 2, the flood. This is where I started losing sleep. After 2008, the Federal Reserve launched quantitative easing. They purchased trillions of dollars in treasury bonds and mortgage-backed securities. The stated goal was to stabilize markets and lower interest rates. The structural effect was to flood the global system with dollars. And the same extraction engine I described in Weimar, Germany and Rome activated immediately. Asset prices surged. Housing, equities, commodities. Those who owned assets before the flood saw their wealth multiply. Those who held only dollars saw their purchasing power erode. The wealth gap did not widen by accident. It widened by mechanism. The same stage, running on schedule. When foreign nations begin trading oil and commodities without dollars, what exactly is backing the currency in your bank account? Now stage 3, the flight. This is the stage I monitor most closely, because stage 3 is where the sequence becomes irreversible, and the early indicators are already present. Foreign central banks have been net sellers of United States Treasury securities in recent years. China held over $1.3 trillion in treasuries around 2013. By 2024, that figure had dropped below $800 billion. They are not panicking. They are repositioning. Quietly, systematically, exactly the way the positioned class has always moved before stage 3 accelerates. The BRICS economic bloc has openly discussed creating alternative trade settlement systems. Saudi Arabia has signaled willingness to accept currencies other than the dollar for oil transactions. The petrodollar framework that sustained global dollar demand for 50 years is showing structural cracks. None of this is secret. None of this is classified intelligence. It is publicly available data. And it maps directly onto stage 3 of the kill sequence. Holders of the currency are beginning to diversify out. Not all at once, not in a dramatic crash, gradually, then suddenly. That is how every stage 3 has begun. Gradually, then suddenly. Every empire's citizens believed they were the exception. Do you still believe that? I need to address the most common objection. The United States has the largest military in the world, the deepest capital markets, the most advanced technology sector. Surely those factors make the dollar immune to the pattern. I believed that once. Then I looked at the British Empire in 1914. They had the largest navy in the world, the deepest capital markets of their era, the most advanced industrial base on the planet. The pound sterling had been the global reserve currency for over a century. None of it mattered. The kill sequence does not care about military power. It does not care about technological superiority. It cares about one thing only: the structural integrity of the monetary base. And once that integrity is compromised through debasement, no amount of aircraft carriers or server farms can restore it. The illusion I carried for years was that the dollar was fundamentally different. That reserve currency status was a shield. Now I see it clearly. Reserve status is not a shield. It is a delay mechanism. It extends stage 2 by creating artificial global demand for the currency. Foreign nations need dollars to trade, so they absorb the flood longer than a domestic-only currency could survive. But the delay does not prevent the outcome. It amplifies it, because the longer stage 2 runs, the more dollars are created. The more dollars are created, the more violent stage 3 becomes when it finally arrives. Every historical case confirms this. The longer the delay, the larger the collapse. I think about what I would tell myself 10 years ago. Before I understood the sequence, I would say this: you are not living in a stable system. You are living in stage 2 of a pattern that has destroyed every currency it has ever touched. The stability you feel is not structural. It is temporal. It is the pause between the flood and the flight. And that pause is narrowing. We do not get to choose whether the sequence runs. We only get to choose whether we recognize it in time. 7 empires did not. I am looking at the data for the 8th, and the data does not care what we believe. 7 empires heard the same promise. This time is different. It never was. The coins change. The sequence does not. And the clock is already running.